A mountain man bought a bride for $5. But what came was a woman covered in blood. He thought he was buying a bit of hope to survive the winter. But what stumbled off that stagecoach wasn't hope. It was a nightmare in a wedding dress. Bleeding, trembling, whispering his name though they'd never met. Outside, the snow falls silent. But there's gunfire in her eyes, and a secret that could burn the whole valley down. She says the lawmen chasing her are murderers. They say she's the killer, and the truth? Buried somewhere in the blood-soaked snow between them. Now the mountain man must choose, believe the woman God sent to his door, or hand her to the men who'll hang her by sunrise. Because in these mountains, mercy can cost more than life itself. What would you do if the bride you bought came covered in blood, and every word she spoke could save your soul, or doom it forever? Drop a comment below, and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Snow whipped against the cabin's weathered logs as Elijah Carver sat at his rough-hewn table, a wrinkled flyer spread before him in the flickering lamplight. His calloused fingers traced the neat black letters. Christian brides for respectable homesteaders, $5 donation required. The paper was worn at the creases from being folded and unfolded countless times since the traveling preacher had passed through last month. The wind howled through the mountain peaks outside, a sound as familiar to Elijah as his own breathing after 15 years in these Colorado heights. But tonight, the lonely cry seemed to pierce deeper than the cold. He glanced at the empty chair across the table where Sarah used to sit before the fever took her 12 winters ago. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse, "I reckon you know what's in my heart." The words came slow, like spring thaw breaking winter ice. "Been a mighty long time since I asked for anything but daily bread and forgiveness." His eyes drifted to the rifle mounted above the stone fireplace, the metal still gleaming despite its age. That gun had fed him, protected him, but it had also brought him his deepest shame. The memory of that crisp autumn morning 7 years ago rose unbidden. The flash of movement he'd mistaken for deer, the crack of the shot, and the horrible discovery of the wounded Ute boy. Though the tribe's medicine man had saved the child's life, Elijah had never forgiven himself. The lamp sputtered, casting dancing shadows on the Bible that lay open to Psalms. Beside it sat the small tin can where he'd been saving coins from his fur trades. He counted them again, though he knew the sum by heart. $5 exactly, earned one pelt at a time. If this be foolishness, he prayed, gathering the coins into a leather pouch. Stop me now. But in his heart, he felt a quiet urging, like a stream running beneath winter ice, a hope he hardly dared name. Rising from his chair, Elijah pulled on his heavy wool coat and wrapped his faded red scarf around his neck. The snow was falling harder now, but he knew the trail to Anderson's trading post like he knew the lines on his own palm. He stepped out into the swirling white, leading his sure-footed mare from the lean-to shelter. "Easy there, Grace," he murmured, patting her neck as he mounted. The horse snorted, her breath visible in the frigid air. The wind bit at his face as they picked their way down the mountain trail, hooves crunching through fresh snow. Peaks rose like sharp teeth against the pewter sky, and the pine forests stood silent sentinel on all sides. Anderson's trading post was a sturdy log structure that served as the only link to civilization for miles around. Smoke curled from its chimney, and yellow lamplight spilled from its windows onto the gathering dusk. As Elijah dismounted, he could hear the telegraph clicking inside, the sound of news trickling into their remote corner of the territory. The bell above the door jangled as he stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. Tom Anderson looked up from his ledger, his round face creasing in a smile beneath his gray mustache. "Elijah Carver. Wasn't expecting anyone in this weather." "Evening, Tom." Elijah removed his hat, snow melting from the brim. "The preacher's courier still due through tonight?" "Matter of fact, he's waiting out the worst of the storm." Anderson gestured to a young man warming himself by the pot-bellied stove. "This here's Matthew Hayes." The courier couldn't have been more than 20, with a fresh face that spoke of Eastern origins. He stood, extending his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Carver. Heard tell you're the best trapper in these parts." Elijah shook the offered hand, noting the smooth skin that had never known real work. "Just Elijah's fine." He reached into his coat and withdrew the leather pouch. "Got something needs delivering to Reverend Johnston." Understanding dawned in Anderson's eyes as he watched Elijah count out the $5. The trading post owner had seen the flyers, too, had probably guessed at the lonely hours in Elijah's cabin. "I'll see it gets to him safe," Matthew promised, carefully noting Elijah's name and location in a small notebook. "The Reverend usually sends word within a month or two, once he's found a suitable match." Elijah nodded, his throat suddenly tight. "Much obliged." He turned to go, then paused. "The lady, whoever she might be, she should know about the Ute settlement nearby. Some folks ain't comfortable with that." "I'll make sure to mention it," Matthew said softly, something like respect entering his young eyes. The storm had strengthened by the time Elijah mounted up for the ride home. The wind drove snow like white needles into his face, and even Grace seemed eager to return to shelter. They moved carefully through the gathering darkness, the mare finding her footing, more by memory than sight. Back in his cabin, Elijah built up the fire and hung his wet coat to dry. His hands moved through the familiar motions of cleaning his rifle, oiling the mechanism that had served him so faithfully and failed him so terribly that one time. The metal gleamed in the firelight as he worked, and he found himself thinking of the unknown woman who might soon share this space. Would she understand the silence of the mountains? Could she accept a man with blood on his hands and prayers in his heart? He set the rifle back in its place above the fireplace, then moved to the cupboard where Sarah's china plate, the only fine thing they'd owned, had gathered dust these dozen years. Carefully, he wiped it clean and set it at the second place at his table. The simple act felt both foolish and profound, like planting seeds before the last frost had passed. He settled into his chair, the lamp burning low. "Lord," he whispered into the quiet cabin, "if this be your will, grant me mercy, and if it ain't—" He paused, listening to the wind's lonely song outside. "Well, I reckon you know best about that, too." The flame flickered, casting his shadow large against the log walls. Outside, the storm continued its wild dance through the Colorado night, but inside, a small seed of hope had been planted in ground long fallow. Whether it would grow remained in God's hands. But for the first time in years, Elijah Carver allowed himself to imagine spring might come again to his heart. He sat there long into the night, the chair across from him empty but waiting, while the snow fell soft and steady outside, covering the mountain world in clean white possibility. 2 weeks crept by like molasses in winter. Elijah found himself checking the mountain trail more often than usual, his eyes drawn to the winding path that connected his remote cabin to the stagecoach route. The snow had settled deep, but the regular stage still made its weekly run, bringing mail and supplies to the scattered homesteads and mining camps. This morning, gray clouds hung low over the peaks, promising more snow. Elijah stood at his usual watching spot, a granite outcropping that offered a clear view of the trail below. He'd brought his rifle, more from habit than necessity, and wore his warmest coat against the bitter wind. His mare Grace stamped restlessly beside him, her breath forming white clouds in the cold air. "Steady now," he murmured, patting her neck. The stage was already an hour late, but that wasn't unusual in this weather. Still, something felt different today. The air held an expectancy that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The first snowflakes began to fall, fat and wet, just as a distant sound caught his attention. The familiar rumble of wooden wheels and the jangle of harness bells drifted up the mountain. But something was wrong. The rhythm was off, uneven, like a limping man's gait. Through the thickening snow, the stagecoach finally lurched, into view. One of the lead horses favored its right foreleg, and the whole team seemed spooked, their eyes rolling white in their heads. The driver, usually a stout man full of frontier bravado, slumped over the reins, his face as pale as the snow around them. Elijah spurred Grace forward, reaching the stage just as it shuddered to a stop. "Jim," he called to the driver, "what happened out there?" The driver's eyes were glazed with shock. "Ambush," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Down by Eagle's Bend. Never saw them coming." His words trailed off as he slumped sideways, unconscious. Elijah caught the man before he could fall, easing him down onto the snow. No blood on him, just the gray pallor of shock and cold. The horses stamped nervously, steam rising from their flanks. His heart pounding, Elijah turned to the stage door. This was supposed to be the day his bride arrived. The preacher's letter had confirmed it just last week. But instead of the orderly arrival he'd imagined, he found himself facing something that felt more like one of his darker dreams. The door creaked open under his hand. Inside the dimness of the coach, a figure huddled on the back seat. A young woman, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, clutched a small leather satchel to her chest. Her dress was stained with blood, whether her own or someone else's, he couldn't tell. Her eyes flickered open as he reached for her. They were the color of storm clouds, and for a moment they focused on his face with startling clarity. "Elijah Carver?" she whispered, her voice rough with pain or fear. Before he could respond, her eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward into his arms. The satchel fell to the floor of the coach as he caught her, feeling the slight weight of her body, the alarming warmth of blood seeping through her dress. Elijah's mind raced. The nearest doctor was 2 days' ride, and in this weather, it might as well have been 200. He'd have to tend to her himself, and quickly. He gathered her up carefully, noting how young she seemed, hardly more than 20 summers. Her skin felt cool to the touch, but she was breathing steadily. That was something to hold on to. "Grace," he called to his mare, who had been watching the proceedings with alert ears. "Got to get her home quick." After securing Jim the driver in the relative shelter of the stage and making sure the horses were safely tethered, Elijah mounted Grace with the unconscious woman cradled against his chest. The small satchel he'd tied to his saddle horn, whatever its contents, they seemed important enough for her to hold on to even while bleeding. The snow fell harder as they climbed the trail to his cabin, the flakes now small and stinging. Grace picked her way carefully, understanding the precious nature of their burden. Elijah found himself praying under his breath, the same words over and over, "Lord, give me wisdom. Lord, let her live." Inside his cabin, the fire had burned low but wasn't out. He laid the woman gently on his bed, then quickly built up the flames and lit every lamp he owned. The warm light revealed what the gray day had hidden: a nasty gash along her right side, just below her ribs. Elijah had learned some about treating wounds during his time as an army scout, and more from the Ute medicine man who'd saved that boy he'd shot. Moving efficiently, he gathered his medical supplies, clean cloths, needle and thread, the bottle of whiskey he kept for emergencies, and herbs he'd learned to recognize as healing. "Forgive me, miss," he murmured as he cut away the blood-soaked fabric around her wound. The gash was deep but clean, made by a knife, most likely. No signs of infection yet, thank the Lord. He worked steadily by lantern light, cleaning and stitching the wound, then binding it with strips of clean cloth. Throughout it all, she never stirred, though her breathing remained steady. Her face, relaxed in unconsciousness, held a determination even in repose, like someone used to carrying heavy burdens. As he finished tending to her wound, something crinkled in the pocket of her dress. Elijah hesitated, then carefully withdrew what looked like a crumpled document. His conscience pricked at him for prying, but he needed to know who she was, what trouble might have followed her to his mountain. The paper was official-looking, with fancy printing and official seals. As he smoothed it out, his hands began to shake. It was a marriage certificate, dated just 3 days ago. And there, in clear black ink, were 2 names, his own and hers. Chloe Bennett, now apparently Chloe Carver. Elijah sank into his chair, the certificate trembling in his weathered hands. The woman on his bed, his wife, according to this paper, was still pale as winter moonlight. Who was she really? What had happened on that stage? And most troubling of all, was she running from justice or towards it? Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their tracks, isolating them further in this mountain sanctuary that could just as easily become a trap. Elijah checked his rifle, made sure it was loaded, then settled in to keep watch through the long night ahead. The lamp burned low, casting shadows that danced across the cabin walls. In all his prayers for a bride, he'd never imagined this, a wounded stranger with his name on her marriage certificate, secrets in her satchel, and blood on her dress. But as he watched her steady breathing and the slow return of color to her cheeks, he felt that same quiet urging in his heart, the one that had led him to send away for a bride in the first place. "Lord," he whispered into the growing darkness, "you brought her to my door. Help me know what's right." No answer came except the soft sound of her breathing and the whisper of snow against the cabin walls. For now, that would have to be enough. Morning crept into the cabin like a shy visitor. Pale winter light filtered through the rough-hewn shutters, painting stripes across the plank floor. Elijah had kept vigil through the night, dozing only in short stretches, his rifle never far from reach. The woman in his bed hadn't stirred except to mumble something in her fever dreams, words that sounded like prayer mixed with fear. As the light grew stronger, he stoked the fire and put coffee on to boil. The familiar tasks anchored him, giving his hands something to do while his mind churned with questions. The marriage certificate lay folded on the table where he'd left it, its official seals seeming to mock him in the growing daylight. A soft sound from the bed drew his attention. The woman was awake, her storm cloud eyes taking in the cabin's interior with cautious assessment. She tried to push herself up, then winced, one hand going to her bandaged side. "Best lie still," Elijah said, keeping his voice gentle. "That wound needs time to heal." She settled back against the pillow, but her gaze remained alert, studying him. "You're Elijah Carver?" "I am." He poured a cup of coffee, added a generous spoonful of honey, and brought it to her. "Think you can manage some?" She nodded, accepting the cup with trembling hands. "Thank you. I'm Chloe May Hollis." Her voice was soft but clear, with just a hint of an accent he couldn't place. "I reckon I owe you my life, Mr. Carver." "Just Elijah will do." He pulled his chair closer to the bed, but not so close as to seem threatening. "Miss Hollis, I need to know what happened on that stage." Pain flickered across her face, and not just from her wound. "Bandits," she said, staring into her coffee cup. "They came out of nowhere, just past Eagle's Bend. The preacher, Reverend Matthews, he tried to protect me." Her voice caught. "They shot him, just shot him down like he was nothing." Tears spilled down her cheeks. Elijah waited, giving her time to collect herself. The coffee cup rattled slightly in her hands. "The driver got us away somehow," she continued, "but I was already bleeding. The rest is hazy." She looked up at him then, direct despite her tears. "The Reverend, he spoke of you. Said you were a good man, God-fearing. He meant to—" She trailed off, her eyes falling on the folded paper on the table. Elijah retrieved the certificate, unfolding it carefully. "This was in your pocket," he said. "It bears both our names, dated 3 days ago." Chloe's face went even paler. "I never signed that," she whispered. "The Reverend, he meant to unite us properly, with witnesses and prayer and—" Fresh tears welled up. "But now he's dead, and I don't know what to think anymore." Elijah studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. He'd learned to read people during his years as a scout. It was often a matter of survival. What he saw in Chloe's eyes was grief, fear, and something else. Something she wasn't saying. "Were you at the mission school?" he asked, remembering what the preacher's letter had said about Christian women seeking godly marriages. She nodded. "I worked as a nurse's aide there, and sometimes I helped interpret for the Cherokee children." Her hand went to a small silver cross at her throat. "The school was my home for 3 years." That explained the accent. There was a lilt of Cherokee in her English, subtle but present. It stirred something in Elijah's memory, echoes of his time among the mountain tribes. Outside, snow continued to fall in lazy spirals. The morning light had taken on that peculiar flatness that meant the storm wasn't finished with them yet. They'd be shut in for at least another day, maybe more. "You need rest," Elijah said, rising from his chair. "And food. I've got some venison I can stew up." "You're very kind," Chloe said softly. "After everything, finding a stranger instead of a proper bride." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Elijah replied, though his own heart was far from settled on the matter. "We'll sort it all out once you're stronger." He busied himself with preparation for the stew, giving them both space to think. The familiar motions of cutting vegetables and meat were soothing, like a prayer without words. As he worked, he found himself watching Chloe from the corner of his eye. She had settled back against the pillows, one hand absently touching her wounded side, her face turned toward the window where snow fell endlessly. When the stew was simmering, Elijah remembered something else. He went to the trunk where he kept his most precious possessions and drew out a blanket, soft with age and careful keeping. "This was my Sarah's," he said, bringing it to Chloe. "Warm as anything, and I reckon you need it more than that trunk does." Chloe's fingers traced the pattern of stars and flowers worked into the weave. "It's beautiful," she said. "Your wife must have been very talented." "She was." The old grief rose up, gentle now after so many years. "Been gone 8 years come spring." Chloe drew the blanket around her shoulders, handling it with obvious respect for its meaning. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. Most men would have left me to die in that stage. No God-fearing man would do such a thing. Some who claim to fear God do worse," she said, so quietly he almost missed it. The comment hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Elijah added another log to the fire, watching the flames leap up fresh and bright. The silence stretched, broken only by the bubble of stew and the soft whisper of snow against the cabin walls. There was more to Chloe's story, That much was clear. The wound in her side, the forged certificate, the death of the preacher. Pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. But looking at her now, wrapped in Sarah's blanket with exhaustion etched on her young face, Elijah felt that same quiet certainty he'd known when he first sent away for a bride. The Lord had led her to his door, through blood and storm and tragedy. The why of it all could wait. The stew needed stirring. Outside, the snow continued its patient work of erasing the world. Inside, two strangers bound by a forged certificate and providence shared the warmth of a fire and the weight of their separate secrets. Chloe hummed softly, a hymn Elijah recognized from his own childhood. Amazing Grace, though she seemed unaware she was doing it. The sound filled the cabin with a gentle melancholy, like the snow outside, covering what was broken until healing could begin. The next morning dawned clear and bitter cold. Elijah stoked the dying embers, adding pine logs until warmth crept back into the cabin's corners. Chloe slept soundly, her breathing steady beneath Sarah's old blanket. The wound in her side was healing clean. No fever had taken hold. Praise the Lord for small mercies. He moved quietly, not wanting to wake her as he prepared coffee and cornmeal mush for breakfast. The familiar routine felt different now, with another soul under his roof. Even in sleep, her presence filled the cabin with something he'd nearly forgotten, the simple comfort of shared space. When the coffee's aroma finally roused her, Chloe sat up carefully, testing her strength. "Smells like heaven," she said, offering a small smile. "Reckon it ain't quite that grand, but it'll chase the morning chill." Elijah brought her a steaming cup. "How's the side feeling?" "Better." She shifted, wincing slightly. "Though I surely won't be dancing anytime soon." "No need for dancing up here," Elijah said. "Just rest and healing." After breakfast, Elijah noticed Chloe eyeing her torn coat where it hung by the door. The fabric was badly ripped, stained dark with blood that wouldn't wash out. Without a word, he retrieved his sewing kit from the trunk, Sarah's old wooden box with its neat compartments of thread and needles. "I can try to mend it," he offered, "though I ain't exactly skilled with fine work." "You'd do that?" Surprise softened her features. Most men wouldn't bother. Most men never lived alone in these mountains. He threaded a needle with careful fingers. Learn to do for yourself, or do without. While he worked on her coat, Chloe watched with interest. "Your stitches are neater than mine would be," she observed. "Though I suppose that comes from mending traps and such." "Trap lines need tending same as anything else." He tied off a knot. "Speaking of which, they'll need checking soon. Weather's clear enough today. Might be good for you to see a bit beyond these walls, if you're feeling strong enough." Chloe's eyes brightened at the suggestion. "I'd like that. Being cooped up reminds me too much of—" She stopped herself, that shadow crossing her face again. "Of what?" Elijah asked gently. "Nothing." She forced a smile. "Just feeling restless, I suppose." Later that morning, bundled in layers against the mountain cold, they made their way to the creek. Elijah kept their pace slow, watching Chloe for any signs of strain. But she moved well enough, though carefully, her boots crunching through fresh snow. The creek ran swift beneath a thin skin of ice, dark water glimpsed through crystalline patches. Elijah demonstrated how to check the traps, explaining each step with patience. "See here?" He pointed to marks in the snow. "Rabbit's been through recent. You want to set the trap just so, where their trail meets cover." Chloe paid close attention, asking intelligent questions about placement and timing. "It's not so different from setting splints," she mused. "Everything has to line up proper, or it won't work right." "That's truth," Elijah agreed. Nature's got its own way of teaching what works and what don't. They spent the afternoon checking the trap line, Elijah sharing knowledge gathered through years of mountain life. Chloe proved an apt student, her hands sure despite the cold, as she helped reset several traps. That evening, as darkness gathered early as it does in winter, they shared a simple supper of beans and cornbread. Before eating, Chloe bowed her head and spoke a quiet grace, her words filling the cabin with unexpected warmth. Lord, we thank you for this food, for shelter from the storm, and for bringing help when we most needed it. Guide us in your wisdom and keep us in your care. Amen. Elijah found himself touched by the simple prayer. It had been years since anyone had blessed a meal in his cabin. That was nice, he said softly. Been a while since I heard grace spoken proper. Mother always said grace should be from the heart, Chloe replied. Even when there's little to be thankful for, there's always something. Your mother sounds wise. She was. Chloe's voice held old grief. She passed when I was young, but I remember her teachings. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling low in the hearth. Outside, night pressed against the window panes, deep and vast as only mountain nights can be. The next day passed in similar fashion, simple tasks shared between them as Chloe regained her strength. Elijah found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, noting how naturally she moved in his space, how her presence seemed to fill empty corners he hadn't known were there. She mended his old coat without being asked, her neat stitches stronger than his own. "Fair trade," she said when he thanked her, "though I doubt my work will last as long as yours." That evening, as they sat by the fire, the quiet was broken by the distant sound of horses. Chloe's reaction was immediate. She stiffened, one hand clutching her side where the wound was still healing, eyes wide with fear. Elijah rose, moving to the window. In the moonlight, the snow-covered clearing showed empty, but the sound came again, closer now. "Might be just traders," he said, though he didn't believe it. Traders rarely came this high in winter. Chloe's face had gone pale. "They've found me," she whispered, then seemed to catch herself. "I mean, who's found you?" Elijah asked quietly. She shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. I shouldn't have brought this to your door. I'm sorry." Elijah crossed to where she sat, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "Listen to me, Miss Hollis. While you're under my roof, ain't nothing going to harm you. That's a promise before God." The words came without thought, but as soon as they left his lips, he knew their weight. This wasn't just duty anymore, or Christian charity. Something deeper had taken root in these few days, a need to protect, to shelter, to stand between this woman and whatever darkness pursued her. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "You don't know what you're promising," she whispered. "These men, they're dangerous." "So am I, when need be." His voice was gentle but firm. "I meant what I said. You're safe here." The sound of horses faded into the distance, but Chloe remained tense, listening. Elijah built up the fire, its warm light pushing back the shadows. Neither of them slept much that night. When dawn finally broke, Elijah checked outside. Fresh hoofprints marked the snow downhill from the cabin, 3 horses by his count. They hadn't come close enough to spot the cabin through the trees, but they'd been searching. He studied the tracks carefully, memorizing their pattern. Whoever these men were, they weren't simple bandits. The tracks showed military precision in their spacing. Back inside, he found Chloe at the window, watching him with worried eyes. She didn't ask about the tracks, and he didn't volunteer what he'd found. Instead, he built up the morning fire and started coffee brewing, its familiar scent a comfort against the tension in the air. The unspoken question of who was searching for her hung between them, heavy as storm clouds. But Elijah held to his promise. She'd speak of it when she was ready. Until then, he'd guard her as best he could. This wounded bird who'd landed at his door through providence or chance. Outside, the mountains kept their ancient watch, snow-covered and silent. The hoofprints would soon be covered by fresh snow, but Elijah knew with certainty that wouldn't be the end of it. Whoever had left those tracks would return. The winter sun hung high and cold when 3 riders emerged from the tree line. Elijah had been splitting wood, his axe paused mid-swing as he spotted them. Something in their approach set his instincts humming. Too purposeful, too measured. These weren't lost travelers seeking shelter. He leaned the axe against the chopping block and retrieved his rifle from beside the cabin door, not raising it, but keeping it ready. Inside, he heard Chloe's soft gasp as she peered through the window. The riders drew up 20 paces out, their horses' breath steaming in the mountain air. The leader sat a big bay gelding, his badge catching sunlight as he reined to a halt. All 3 men wore heavy winter coats, but Elijah noted the telltale bulk of hidden weapons beneath. "Afternoon," the leader called out, touching the brim of his hat. "U.S. Marshal Warren Pike. These here are my deputies." His tone was courteous enough, but his eyes were hard as river rocks. Elijah nodded once, not moving from his position. "Far peace from any federal court, Marshal." Following a serious matter. Pike's gaze swept past him to the cabin. "We're seeking a fugitive. Young woman, mixed blood. Name of Chloe May Hollis. Trail leads this direction." Inside the cabin, Elijah heard a sharp intake of breath. His grip tightened on the rifle stock, but he kept his voice level. "That's quite an accusation. Mind sharing what crimes this woman's supposed to have committed?" Marshal Pike reached into his coat, movements deliberately slow, and withdrew a folded paper. "Murder of a federal agent. Theft of government gold meant for Indian schools." He held out the warrant. "Feel free to read it yourself." Elijah stepped forward cautiously and took the paper. The charges were laid out in formal language. Murder, theft, conspiracy. The description matched Chloe perfectly, but something in the careful precision of the words rang false, like fool's gold catching light. "Serious charges indeed," he said, handing the warrant back. "But I'd need to see proper papers before turning anyone over. Judge's seal, witness signatures, all proper and legal-like." Pike's expression hardened. "That warrants all the authority I need, friend. Now, we know she's here. Make this easier on everyone and send her out." "You know she's hurt?" Elijah asked quietly. "Took a bullet not 3 days past." "Afraid that was necessary," one of the deputies spoke up, a thin man with cold eyes. "She resisted arrest, shot our man dead." The cabin door creaked open behind him. "They're lying!" Chloe's voice rang out, though she stayed inside. "They murdered the preacher. They're the ones who stole the gold." Marshal Pike's hand dropped to his gun belt. "Miss Hollis, you're making this worse for yourself. Come out now, nice and peaceful." Elijah shifted, placing himself more firmly between the door and the riders. "Way I see it, Marshal, something here doesn't add up proper. You say she killed a man and stole gold. She says different. Without proper papers, I can't rightly turn her over." "You're interfering with federal law enforcement," Pike warned. "That's a serious offense." "So's murder," Elijah replied evenly. "And false arrest. I've lived these mountains 30 years, Marshal. Seen all kinds of men with badges. Some wore them rightful, some didn't." He paused, letting that sink in. "Show me proper papers. Signed and sealed, I'll cooperate full willing. Until then, anyone seeking shelter under my roof stays under my protection." The marshal's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, old man. We'll be back with a posse. When we return, either hand her over or we'll take her. and maybe bring you in too for harboring a fugitive." "Your choice," Elijah said quietly. "But come armed for trouble, you'll find it." Pike wheeled his horse, snow spraying from its hooves. 2 days, he snapped. "That's all the grace you get." The 3 riders spurred away, leaving churned snow and heavy silence. Elijah waited until they were well gone before turning to the cabin. Chloe stood in the doorway, face pale but chin lifted. "They'll be back," she whispered. "Aye." He stepped inside, mind already working. "Which is why we need to move you somewhere safer. There's an old line shack, about 4 miles up through the pines. Used it years back during trapping season. Nobody knows about it except me." "But your promise—" She hesitated. "You said while I was under your roof." "And you still are," he assured her. "Just a different roof is all. Can't defend this cabin proper if they come with numbers." He began gathering supplies. Blankets, dried meat, matches. "Need to know, though, was any of what they said true?" Chloe sank into a chair, hands twisted in her lap. "The gold was real. The preacher collected it for Cherokee schools, donations from churches back east. But I never stole it. Those men, they've been taking it all along, claiming it was administrative costs. The preacher found proof, was going to report them." Her voice broke. "That's why they killed him. I saw it happen, saw Pike give the order. Been running ever since." Elijah nodded slowly. The pieces fit better now. The ambush, her fear, the marshal's smooth lies. "Best get packed then. They'll wait for daylight, but we should move before dark." They worked quickly, gathering only essentials. Elijah packed food, ammunition, medical supplies. Chloe bundled warm clothing and took only what she could carry in a small bag. As sunset painted the snow pink and gold, they set out, Elijah leading the way through the deepening shadows. The line shack was small but solid, tucked into a stand of thick pines. 1 room, with a stone fireplace and rough plank walls chinked with moss. Elijah had built it years ago when he trapped these valleys regular. The location was its best defense. Unless you knew exactly where to look, you'd pass within 50 feet and never spot it. "It's not much," he apologized, getting a fire started while Chloe looked around. "But it'll keep you warm and hidden." "It's perfect," she said softly. "Though I hate putting you in danger like this." "Made my choice same as you did." He straightened from the hearth as flames caught the dry pine. "Sometimes doing right puts a man crossways with the law. Don't make it wrong." Chloe unpacked her small bag, setting out the few belongings she'd brought. "The preacher used to say that too, that God's law stands above man's law." She smiled sadly. "He was a good man. Believed education could bridge the gap between peoples, help heal old wounds. Those men, they saw it as a way to profit from others' charity." Elijah nodded, understanding better now why she'd risked so much. This wasn't just about survival, but about justice, protecting something larger than herself. The same quiet voice that had urged him to send for a bride now told him he was exactly where he needed to be. "I'll check on you daily," he promised, gathering his gear to head back. "Bring supplies, keep watch. They'll search the cabin first, but if they start ranging wider—" He patted his rifle. "Well, winter in these mountains can be mighty dangerous for those who don't know them proper." "Thank you," Chloe said softly. "For believing me. For helping when you didn't have to." "Reckon I did have to," he replied. "Man's got to answer to his conscience same as to the law, sometimes more so." He paused at the door. "Bar this behind me. Don't open for anyone but me, and only if I give our signal. 3 taps, pause, then 2 more. She nodded, already moving to secure the door as he stepped out. The night had deepened, stars pricking bright through the pine branches. Somewhere out there, Marshal Pike and his men were probably making camp, planning tomorrow's search. But up here, surrounded by the ancient mountains, their threats seemed smaller, more human. Elijah moved silently through the darkness, his boots leaving prints that would be gone by morning. He'd meant what he said about conscience. Whatever came next, he knew he was doing right by God and his own soul. The rest would sort itself out in his time. The line shack creaked in the mountain wind as fresh snow drifted against its weathered walls. Chloe pulled the woolen blanket tighter around her shoulders, watching frost patterns form on the single window pane. 3 days had passed since she'd taken refuge here, and already the isolation weighed heavy, but not as heavy as the memories that haunted her quiet hours. She opened the small leather journal Elijah had brought her yesterday, smoothing its pages in the dim light. Writing helped pass the time between his visits and gave order to her tumbling thoughts. The pencil scratched softly as she began. The mission school near Indian Territory wasn't much to look at. Just a few wooden buildings with a bell tower that rang morning and evening. But to the Cherokee children who came to learn, it was a bridge to a better future. I remember their faces, bright with hope, as I helped tend scrapes and fevers between my duties as interpreter. Her hand trembled slightly as darker memories surfaced. Then Marshal Pike started visiting more often, always when the preacher received charity gold from Eastern churches. I noticed the ledger numbers never quite matched the donations. When I mentioned it to the preacher, he grew concerned. He investigated quietly, gathering proof of theft. The day he confronted Pike was the last time I saw him alive. A sharp rap at the door made her jump. 3 knocks, pause, then 2 more. Elijah's signal. Chloe hurried to unbolt the door, grateful for the interruption of her dark thoughts. He stomped snow from his boots before entering, bringing with him the sharp scent of pine and winter air. His arms were laden with supplies, fresh bread, dried meat, more firewood. "Storm's picking up," he reported, setting down his burden. "Should keep any unwanted visitors from ranging too far for a spell." "Thank you," Chloe said softly, helping him unpack. "I've been trying to make the supplies last, but no need to stretch them thin," he assured her. "Got plenty stored back at the cabin." He paused, studying her face. "You been writing?" She nodded toward the open journal. "It helps, somehow. Getting the memories down on paper makes them feel less overwhelming." Elijah pulled up the room's only chair, while Chloe settled back on her bedroll near the hearth. The fire popped and crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines. "Tell me more about the school," he said quietly. "About your work there." Chloe's eyes grew distant with remembering. Most of the children spoke only Cherokee when they arrived. I'd learned enough from my mother's people to help them understand their lessons, tend to them when they were sick or homesick. The preacher believed education could heal old wounds between peoples, help the children walk in both worlds with dignity. She smiled sadly. He used to say every soul was precious in God's sight, no matter their birth or station. Sounds like a good man. He was. When he discovered the theft, how Pike and his men were stealing the charity gold meant for the children's care, he couldn't stay silent. Said we had a duty to truth, no matter the cost. Her voice caught. I never thought the cost would be so high. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the fire's soft crackle. Finally, Elijah spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I know something about costly mistakes, he said. Been carrying one of my own these past 8 years. Chloe looked up, sensing the weight of unspoken grief in his words. Was tracking elk up near Timberline, he continued slowly. Weather was turning bad, light getting tricky, saw movement in the brush, just a flash of brown. Took my shot without being certain. He drew a shuddering breath. Wasn't elk. Was a Ute boy. Probably hunting same as me. Hit him in the shoulder, not fatal, but in that weather. What happened? Chloe asked gently. Found his camp 2 days later. He'd made it back to his people, survived the wound. But the shame of it, knowing I'd acted too quick, could have killed an innocent, that stayed with me. Changed how I see things. He met her eyes across the firelight. Maybe that's why I couldn't just turn you over to Pike and his men? Seen too clear how justice and truth ain't always what men with badges claim them to be. Chloe's heart ached at the pain in his voice. The boy lived, Elijah. It was an accident. Aye, but intention don't always lighten the burden of consequence. He smiled grimly. Though I reckon that's why we need grace. Being human as we are, full of mistakes and regrets. The preacher used to say grace was God's way of making something beautiful from our brokenness, Chloe offered softly, like a potter reshaping clay. Elijah nodded. Mind if we pray together? Been a while since I shared prayer with another soul. I'd like that. They bowed their heads as Elijah's rough voice filled the small space. Lord, we come before you broken vessels both, seeking your mercy and guidance. Watch over this woman in her hiding, guard the truth she carries. Help us see your path through these troubled times, and forgive us our trespasses as we learn to forgive ourselves. Amen. Amen, Chloe echoed, wiping tears from her cheeks. The intimate moment was shattered by the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoing across the valley. Both tensed, listening. 2 more shots followed, more distant. Marshall's men, Elijah said grimly, rising to peer through the frosted window. Probably shooting game, but could be warning shots too, letting us know they're still searching. Even in this weather? Pike strikes me as a patient man when profit's concerned. He gathered his gear, preparing to leave. I'll circle wide going back, check if they're ranging closer. You keep that door barred tight. Chloe caught his arm as he turned to go. Be careful, Elijah. Your life's worth more than my safety. He covered her hand with his own for a brief moment. Reckon that's for me to judge. Then he was gone, swallowed by the swirling snow. Chloe stood listening until his footsteps faded completely. The line shack felt colder somehow without his presence. She added wood to the fire, then returned to her journal, recording the day's events while they were fresh in her mind. As she wrote about Elijah's confession, she realized their shared guilt had formed a bond stronger than any marriage certificate, a connection forged of mutual understanding and grace. Outside, another distant shot echoed through the gathering dusk. Chloe shivered and drew closer to the fire's warmth, praying for Elijah's safe return tomorrow. The snow continued falling, thick and silent, blanketing the mountain world in white. Days crawled past like molasses in winter. The woodpile dwindled faster than expected, and their stored food supplies showed alarming gaps. Chloe kept careful count of everything: 6 biscuits, 3 strips of dried venison, half a sack of beans, and precious little coffee. She'd taken to brewing pine needle tea instead, remembering her grandmother's teachings about its healing properties. The line shack felt smaller with each passing hour. Its rough-hewn walls seemed to close in during the long stretches between Elijah's visits. Chloe paced the creaking floorboards, humming hymns to keep her spirits up while watching snowflakes spiral past the frosted window panes. That evening, she waited longer than usual for Elijah's signal. The winter sun had long since disappeared behind the mountains, and her small fire cast jumping shadows across the walls. When 3 knocks finally came, followed by 2 more, Chloe's relief quickly turned to concern. Elijah stumbled in, coating the floor with snow. His beard was crusted with ice, and exhaustion lined his face. Without a word, He sank onto the room's only chair, his breathing heavy. "You're half frozen," Chloe exclaimed, hurrying to help him remove his snow-laden coat. "What happened?" "Took the long way around," he said, his voice rough from the cold. "Had to be certain I wasn't followed." He accepted the cup of pine needle tea she pressed into his hands, warming them around its edges. "Saw smoke rising from the valley below. Marshall's camp, I reckon. 3, maybe 4 fires." Chloe's heart sank. "They're not giving up." "No," Elijah agreed grimly. "Pike's got his men spread out in a net, watching the main trails. They know these mountains can't hold us forever. Sooner or later, we'll need supplies." The fire popped and hissed as Chloe added another precious log. She stood with her back to Elijah, shoulders tense. "You should go," she said quietly. "Leave while you still can. I won't have your death on my conscience, too." "That's not happening." "Please." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You've done more than enough already. Pike and his men, they're worse than you know. The things they've done, I can't bear the thought of them adding you to their list of victims." Elijah set down his cup and leaned forward, fixing her with a steady gaze. "Tell me then. Tell me everything." Chloe sank down onto her bedroll, twisting her hands in her lap. The moment she'd been dreading had finally come. I haven't been entirely honest with you," she began. "About who I am. What I know." "I'm listening." She took a deep breath. "My mother was Cherokee, daughter of a medicine woman who married an Irish trader. I grew up learning both worlds, walking between them like a bridge." A sad smile crossed her face. "That's why the preacher hired me for the mission school. I could speak to the children in their own tongue, help ease their fear of strange ways and strange words." Understanding dawned in Elijah's eyes. "That's why you knew about the pine needle tea." Chloe nodded. "Grandmother's teachings. She said knowledge was a gift meant to be shared, like water flowing between cups." Her expression hardened. "But some men see knowledge, and people, as things to be used. Marshall Pike was one of those." She rose and began to pace, the words tumbling out faster now. The preacher trusted him at first. Pike was supposed to protect the school, make sure the charity gold from Eastern churches reached us safely. But things started going missing. Medicine supplies, books, building materials. The numbers in the ledger never matched what actually arrived. "He was skimming from the funds," Elijah said softly. "Worse than that. He had a whole network. Corrupt Indian agents, railroad men, even a judge. They were stealing from every tribal, school and mission in the territory. The preacher..." Her voice caught. "He gathered proof, letters, account books, witness statements. He was going to testify before the territorial governor. Until they stopped him. They attacked the stage just after sunset." Chloe wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the fire's warmth. "The preacher tried to protect me, told me to run with the evidence. Pike shot him in cold blood. I heard him laughing afterward, saying no one would believe a half-breed's word against a U.S. Marshal." Elijah's hands clenched into fists. "The marriage certificate. Was that part of their plan?" "I think Pike meant to use it to discredit me. Make it look like I'd conspired with the preacher to steal the money myself." She gave a bitter laugh. "Who would trust the word of a woman who forged marriage papers to trap an honest settler? But you found me first. God's providence, the preacher would have called it, though I doubt he meant for things to unfold quite this way." She turned to Elijah, her face etched with worry. "Now you understand why you have to leave. Pike won't stop until he silences everyone who knows the truth. The evidence I carried, the letters that could expose them all, they're still hidden in that stage. If they find it, then we'll have to get to it first." Elijah stood, decision hardening his features. Timber Hollow's the nearest town with a telegraph office. Once the storm breaks, we can— No! Chloe grabbed his arm. It's too dangerous. The marshal's men will be watching every trail. Probably, he agreed. But they'll be watching for you, not me. I can scout ahead, arrange for horses. And if they catch you? If they realize you're helping me? Elijah covered her hand with his own. Then I'll face that judgment knowing I stood for what's right. 8 years ago, I shot an innocent boy because I acted without thinking. I've carried that weight ever since. But this time, he squeezed her fingers gently. This time I see clear. What Pike and his men are doing, stealing from children, killing honest men, that's the real crime here. And turning away from that truth would be a sin worse than any mistake I've made before. Tears spilled down Chloe's cheeks. I don't deserve such faith. It ain't about deserving, Elijah said softly. It's about doing what's right in God's eyes, and I reckon he put us together for just such a purpose. They stood in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Chloe nodded. Timber Hollow, then. If we can reach the telegraph office. We'll need supplies first, horses, food for the journey. Elijah moved to gather his snow-crusted coat. I'll head back before dawn, start making preparations. The storm's starting to ease. Might be our best chance before Pike brings in more men. Be careful, Chloe whispered. If anything happened to you, keep praying, he said simply. Seems to have worked so far. She helped him secure his coat, checking that no supplies would rattle and give him away. At the door, he paused. Your mother's people, they got a saying for times like these? When the path ahead looks dark? A ghost of a smile touched Chloe's lips. Grandmother used to say that eagles build their nests in high places because they trust their wings more than they fear the height. Elijah nodded thoughtfully. Wise woman, your grandmother. He gave her hand one final squeeze, then slipped out into the pre-dawn darkness. Chloe stood at the window long after his footsteps had faded, watching the eastern sky slowly lighten. The snow was finally letting up, but somehow that brought more fear than comfort. Clear weather meant clear trails. Clear trails meant Pike's men would be moving again soon. She returned to her bedroll and knelt in prayer, adding her voice to the countless others who had sought guidance in dark times. Outside, the wind whistled through the pines, carrying with it the promise of change. For better or worse remained to be seen. Sleet pelted Elijah's face as he guided his horse down the muddy trail toward Timber Hollow. The weather had turned from snow to freezing rain, making the descent treacherous. His mount picked its way carefully over ice-slicked rocks, steam rising from its flanks despite the bitter cold. The journey had taken half a day longer than usual, forcing him to take winding paths to avoid the main trails where Pike's men might be watching. His shoulders ached from hours in the saddle, but concern for Chloe drove him forward. The sooner he could secure help in town, the better their chances. Timber Hollow emerged from the gray afternoon like a smudge of charcoal against the mountainside. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys, and the telegraph office's wind-worn sign creaked in the wind. Elijah dismounted at the livery stable, his boots squelching in the mud. Rough weather for traveling, the stable boy commented, taking the reins. Had business that couldn't wait, Elijah replied shortly, dropping a coin in the boy's palm. He adjusted his coat collar against the sleet and headed toward the post office. Best to know what he was facing before seeking out the preacher. The post office bell jangled as he pushed through the door. Warmth from the pot-bellied stove hit him like a wave, along with the familiar smell of leather and paper. Old Tom Watson dozed behind the counter, his spectacles sliding down his nose. "Morning, Tom," Elijah called, stamping his boots on the plank floor. Tom startled awake. "Well, if it ain't Elijah Carver, ain't seen you down from them mountains in a month of Sundays?" He peered at Elijah through foggy lenses. "Something must have brought you out in this weather." "Just checking if any mail came through before the storms." Elijah moved toward the wall of wooden cubbies, but his attention was drawn to the notice board beside them. Fresh, wanted posters had been tacked up, still crisp despite the humidity. His heart stumbled when he saw her face. The sketch was crude but recognizable, Chloe's delicate features rendered harsh by the artist's pen. Above the image, bold letters proclaimed, "Wanted, Chloe May Hollis, murderess." The reward listed was $500. The charges included murder of a federal agent and theft of government funds. At the bottom, smaller print noted the notice was authorized by the Territorial Marshal's Office and Union Pacific Railroad Company. "Awful business, that," Tom commented, following Elijah's gaze. "Marshal Pike himself brought those posters through yesterday. Said she killed a preacher too, if you can believe it." Elijah forced his expression to remain neutral. "That's so." "Way I heard it, she was working some kind of confidence scheme, getting close to men of the cloth, then robbing them blind." Tom shook his head. "Railroad companies mighty interested in seeing her brought to justice, offering that reward money themselves, on account of her stealing from their Indian school funding." The irony of their lies twisted Elijah's gut. He made a show of checking his mail cubby, finding it empty as expected. "Reckon evil takes all forms these days." "True enough." Tom settled back in his chair. "Though between you and me, something about this don't sit right. My Mabel knew that girl when she passed through here last summer. Said she was quiet-like, always helping at the mission school. Don't seem the murdering type." "Can't always tell by looking," Elijah said carefully. He tipped his hat to Tom and stepped back into the sleeting rain, his mind churning. The railroad's involvement complicated things. They had deep pockets and longer reach than even the marshal's office. He made his way through puddles and mud to the Methodist church at the edge of town. It was a humble building with weathered clapboard siding, but the windows glowed warm welcome against the gray day. Reverend Harlan would be there. He always was, tending to his flock no matter the weather. The Reverend was stacking firewood near the church steps when Elijah approached. Despite the cold, he wore only a worn black coat over his collar. His lined face broke into a smile of recognition. "Elijah Carver, the Lord works in mysterious ways. I was just thinking of you this morning." He set down an armload of wood. "Come in out of this wet. I've got coffee heating on the stove." Inside the church's small study, Reverend Harlan poured 2 tin cups of strong coffee. The room smelled of pine smoke and old books. Elijah wrapped his cold fingers around the warm metal, choosing his words carefully. "Reverend, I need your counsel, and your discretion." Harlan's eyes sharpened, though his gentle manner didn't change. "Both are freely given, you know that. It's about the wanted posters in town. The woman they're hunting, Chloe Hollis." "Ah." The Reverend settled into his chair. "I wondered if this might concern her. Marshal Pike was quite insistent when he posted those notices." "The charges are false," Elijah said quietly. "She's being hunted because she witnessed something she wasn't meant to see. Something involving stolen money meant for Indian schools." Harlan's expression grew grave. "That's a serious claim, Elijah. Do you have proof?" "She does. But she needs someone of standing to hear her story. Someone whose word carries weight with the territorial governor." "And you're telling me this because she's in my care, has been since the stage was attacked." Elijah met the Reverend's searching gaze. "I believe God put her in my path for a reason. And I believe you're the kind of man who'd want to know the truth, no matter how ugly it might be." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the snap of burning wood in the stove. Finally, Harlan spoke. "During the war, I served as a chaplain, saw how easy it was for men with power to twist the truth, to make evil seem righteous. But I also saw how a single voice speaking truth could change hearts." He leaned forward. "Bring her to me. If her story is as you say, I'll help however I can." Relief loosened the knot in Elijah's chest. "Thank you, Reverend, but there's risk in helping us. The railroad company has no power over God's justice," Harlan finished firmly. "Bring her here after dark tomorrow. We'll use the old missionary quarters behind the church. No one needs to know she's here until we're ready." Elijah finished his coffee and stood, muscles protesting. The journey back would be harder than the ride down, but knowing help waited at the end made it bearable. "God's grace go with you," Harlan said at the door. "And Elijah, be careful. Pike's men have been watching the trails. Much obliged for the warning." Elijah pulled his coat tight and stepped back into the frigid afternoon. The sleet had finally stopped, but darkness was gathering early, purple clouds piling up against the mountains. His horse was fed and rested, thanks to the stable boy's care. Elijah mounted quickly and headed out of town, taking a different route than he'd used coming in. The wet weather would help hide his tracks, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The climb back into the mountains was slow going. His horse picked its way through shadow and ice, while Elijah's mind raced ahead to Chloe. The wanted posters changed things. $500 would draw every bounty hunter for miles. They needed to move fast before greed loosened more tongues in town. Night had fully fallen by the time he reached the ridge above the line shack. The clouds had broken enough to let moonlight filter through, turning the fresh snow to silver. Elijah dismounted to lead his horse the final stretch, not wanting hoofbeats to carry in the still air. That's when he saw it, firelight moving through the trees near the old shack. Not the steady glow of a cabin lantern, but the bobbing motion of torches. His heart clenched. 3, maybe 4 lights approaching from the west. Elijah dropped the reins and broke into a run, no longer caring about noise, but the snow betrayed him, making each step treacherous. He was still 200 yards away when the first torch reached the shack's door. "Please, Lord," he whispered, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "Let me not be too late." Elijah's boots slipped on the icy ground as he raced toward the shack. His heart pounded against his ribs, each breath burning in the frozen air. The torchlight ahead bobbed closer to the cabin door with every passing second. He reached the clearing just as the first torchbearer stepped onto the small porch. The wooden planks creaked under heavy boots. Elijah dropped to one knee behind a thick pine, steadying his rifle against the trunk. Through the scope, he counted 4 men, 2 by the door, 2 circling toward the back. "Miss Hollis," a familiar voice rang out. Marshal Pike. "We know you're in there. Come out peaceful-like, and no one needs to get hurt." Silence answered. Elijah's finger tensed on the trigger, but he held back. Something wasn't right. No lamplight showed through the shack's single window. No movement stirred the threadbare curtain. One of Pike's men kicked the door open. Torchlight spilled into the empty interior. "She's gone, Marshal," the man's voice carried clear in the still night. "But the ashes are still warm. Can't be far." Pike cursed. "Check for tracks. She's on foot. She can't have gotten more than an hour's head start in this snow." Elijah's eyes searched the ground around the shack. There, barely visible in the moonlight, a line of small footprints led away from the back window into the dense timber. Chloe had escaped before they arrived. Smart girl. A rifle shot cracked through the night. One of Pike's men had spotted him. "Over there, by the big pine!" Elijah fired back, not aiming to kill, but to scatter them. He heard shouts and the satisfying sound of men diving for cover. Taking advantage of their confusion, he sprinted back to where he'd left his horse. "After him!" Pike bellowed. "That's Carver, the trapper who's been hiding her." More shots rang out. Bark exploded from a tree near Elijah's head. He swung into the saddle and spurred his horse deeper into the timber. The animal knew these woods almost as well as he did, picking its way through the undergrowth despite the darkness. Behind him, hoofbeats thundered in pursuit. Elijah guided his mount off the game trail and into rougher ground. The horse's breath came in great white plumes as they climbed higher into the rocks. Each step kicked loose stones that clattered down the slope. The marshal's torches appeared like fireflies through the trees below. Elijah pressed on until the sound of pursuit grew distant. Finally, when his horse's flanks heaved with exhaustion, he dismounted in a small hollow sheltered by fallen logs. "Easy now," he whispered, patting the animal's sweating neck. "You done good." The night had grown bitter cold. Elijah's breath frosted in his beard as he studied the terrain. Chloe's tracks would lead away from the shack. But where would she go? She was smart enough to avoid the main trails, which meant... He smiled grimly. The old lightning-struck pine. They'd talked about it just yesterday. A massive tree split by storms years ago, its hollow trunk big enough to shelter in. It was their agreed-upon meeting place if trouble came. Leaving his horse ground-tied in the hollow, Elijah moved carefully through the darkness. The snow had stopped, but clouds still hid most of the stars. He relied on memory and instinct, counting ridge lines and creek beds until he spotted the lightning tree's broken crown against the sky. "Chloe," he called softly, approaching the massive trunk. "It's Elijah." A small sound came from beneath the sprawling roots where the tree met the hillside. Chloe emerged from the shadows, shivering violently. Her dress was soaked to the knees, her face pale in the weak moonlight. "Thank God," she whispered through chattering teeth. "I heard the shots. I feared—" "Hush now. You did right, getting clear of that shack." Elijah shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Her skin felt like ice. "But we need to find better shelter before this cold takes us both." He knew these mountains like the verses in his Bible. Half a mile north, a granite outcropping housed a shallow cave, more of a deep overhang, really, but it would block the wind and hide a small fire's light from searching eyes. Supporting Chloe with one arm, Elijah led them carefully through the darkness. She stumbled often, her feet numb from cold and exhaustion. When she nearly fell, he simply picked her up and carried her the last 100 yards. The cave entrance was narrow, but opened into a space about 12 feet deep. Old ashes in one corner showed where others had sheltered here before. Elijah set Chloe down gently and quickly gathered dry pine needles and small branches from the protected space beneath the rock overhang. Soon a tiny fire cast warm light on the granite walls. Chloe huddled close to the flames, still shaking. Elijah spread his bedroll on the stone floor and insisted she lie down while he heated water in his tin cup. "I'm so sorry," she whispered as he handed her the warm drink. Tears traced silver lines down her cheeks. "You've lost your home, your peace, all because of me. I never meant to bring such trouble to your door." Elijah settled beside her, adding small sticks to the fire. "Now don't you start with that. The Lord guides our paths for His purposes, not ours." He touched her shoulder gently. "Maybe I needed some trouble in my life. Been hiding from the world too long, nursing old hurts instead of doing what's right." "But they'll kill you if they catch you helping me." Her voice broke. "The marshal, the railroad men, they don't care about justice. They only want their stolen. Money kept quiet, and they'll destroy anyone who stands in their way. Then we best not let them catch us. Elijah's tone was firm but kind. Listen to me, Chloe May. Every step since you came to my door has felt guided by something bigger than us both. I don't regret a single one of those steps, and I won't regret whatever comes next. She looked up at him, firelight reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. Why? Why risk everything for a stranger? Because it's right. Because that preacher died protecting you and those Cherokee children's future. He paused, choosing his words carefully. And because you ain't a stranger anymore, not to my heart. Fresh tears spilled down Chloe's cheeks, but this time a small smile accompanied them. She reached for his hand, squeezing it tight. Thank you for everything. Elijah squeezed back, then rose to check the cave entrance. The night had deepened, stars now visible through breaks in the clouds. No torchlight showed on the ridges below. They were safe for the moment. Get some rest, he told her. Tomorrow we'll retrieve my horse and make for Timber Hollow. Reverend Harlan's waiting to hear your story. A preacher? Fear flickered in her eyes. A good man, one who believes in truth more than power. Elijah settled back near the fire. Sleep now, I'll keep watch. Chloe lay down on the bedroll, still wrapped in his coat. Her shivering gradually ceased as exhaustion took hold. Soon her breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Elijah fed small twigs into the fire, watching the flames dance against stone walls. His own weariness pressed heavy, but his mind remained alert. Everything had changed now. They were both fugitives, pursued by men who wore badges but served greed instead of justice. Yet somehow, watching Chloe sleep in the firelight, he felt more at peace than he had in years. God's ways were mysterious indeed. He'd prayed for companionship, for purpose beyond his solitary life. Now here he was, guardian to a brave woman who carried truth that could bring down corrupt men. Outside, an owl called softly in the darkness. Elijah settled his rifle across his knees and began to pray, not for safety or escape, but for strength to see this journey through to whatever end the Lord had planned. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale lavender when Elijah and Chloe emerged from their cave shelter. The air held a different quality now, still cold, but lacking winter's brutal edge. Elijah tested the snow with his boot, noting how it compressed with a wet sound rather than the dry crunch of deep winter. Weather's turning, he said quietly, helping Chloe mount behind him on his horse. Thaw's coming early this year. The big horse shifted beneath their combined weight, eager to move after a night's rest. Elijah guided them south, choosing game trails and narrow paths between the pines where larger groups couldn't follow. Every so often, he stopped to listen for pursuit, but only forest sounds reached them. Wind in the branches, melting snow dropping from limbs, an occasional bird call. My mother used to say the first thaw was Creator's promise, Chloe said softly, her arms secure around Elijah's waist as they picked their way down a rocky slope. No matter how long the winter, spring always returns. Elijah nodded, touched by the hope in her words. Seems your mother was wise in the ways of both worlds. She was. Chloe's voice carried a familiar ache of loss. She taught at the mission school where I later worked, said education was a bridge between peoples, if we'd only be brave enough to cross it. They rode in companionable silence for several hours, stopping briefly at midday to rest the horse and share a meager meal of dried venison and hard biscuits. Elijah had grabbed what supplies he could during their escape, but they would need to make them last. The afternoon brought them to lower elevation, where the snow lay in patches rather than blankets. Here, early spring flowers pushed through the melting drifts, tiny purple blooms that seemed to glow in the filtered sunlight. Mountain beauties, Elijah explained, noticing Chloe's interest. First flowers of the season. My Sarah used to gather them by the handful. He fell silent, surprised by how naturally his late wife's name had come to his lips. Chloe squeezed his shoulder gently. Tell me about her. She was... Elijah paused, searching for words. She was like sunshine after rain. Could find joy in the smallest things. First flowers, fresh bread, a bird's song. Never did understand why she chose a rough mountain man like me, but she made these hills feel like heaven for the years we had. How long has she been gone? 6 years come summer. He guided the horse around a fallen log. Fever took her quick. Nothing I could do but hold her hand and pray. I'm sorry, Chloe whispered. Such a hard thing to watch someone slip away. They made camp that evening beneath a massive spruce, its branches creating a natural shelter. Elijah built a small fire, screening it carefully to hide the light. They ate the last of the biscuits, saving the remaining venison for tomorrow's journey. As night settled over the forest, Chloe began humming softly, a melody that seemed to weave through the darkness like smoke. The tune stirred something in Elijah's memory. That's familiar, he said. Church hymn? Chloe shook her head. Cherokee hymn. My mother taught it to me. It's about walking the good path even when the way seems dark. She translated the words slowly. Creator above, light our steps. Draw us home through shadow. Make us strong to help each other. Let love guide our way. The melody settled into Elijah's heart, like a key turning in a long, rusted lock. Without conscious thought, he found himself humming along, his deep voice harmonizing with hers. The sound of his own singing startled him. He hadn't raised his voice in song since Sarah's passing. Chloe's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with understanding. They let the hymn fade naturally into the night air. Neither spoke of it, but something had shifted between them, as subtle and significant as the changing of seasons. They rose before dawn the next day, sharing the last of their water before mounting up. The horse moved more slowly now, tired from carrying double weight over rough terrain. Elijah walked beside it when the ground allowed, one hand on the reins, the other near his rifle. The day warmed steadily. More patches of bare ground showed through the melting snow, and the air carried hints of spring, wet earth, new growth, the sharp scent of pine sap running in the warming sun. They crossed 3 small streams, their waters swollen with snowmelt. How much further to Timber Hollow? Chloe asked, as they paused to let the horse drink from the 3rd stream. Should see the steeple by sunset if we keep this pace. Elijah scanned the horizon. Town's grown some since I was there last. Railroad brought new folks, new money. And new corruption, Chloe added quietly. Those men who killed the preacher, they're connected to the railroad company. They've been stealing funds meant for Indian schools, using the money to buy land cheap before the rail lines go in. Elijah nodded grimly. Reverend Harlan's been speaking out against such dealings. That's why I trust him to hear your story. Man's got courage to match his convictions. They pushed on through the afternoon, following the sun's westward arc. The terrain gradually opened into rolling hills, with fewer trees and more open meadows. Elijah kept them to the tree line where possible, wary of being spotted against the snow. Near dusk, just as the light began to fade, they crested a rise and saw it, Timber Hollow's church steeple, rising above the town's buildings like a finger pointing heavenward. The sight gave them both pause, hope, and apprehension mingling in their hearts. Chloe's arms tightened around Elijah's waist. What if the marshals are watching the town? Then we'll find another way, he assured her. But first we try truth. Sometimes that's the best weapon against evil, bringing dark deeds into God's light. They stood a moment longer, watching the last sunlight gild the white steeple. The journey had changed them both. Elijah felt it in the way Chloe trusted her weight against his back, in the quiet strength they'd found in sharing burdens. His solitary life seemed distant now, like a winter dream fading in spring's warmth. The hymn Chloe had taught him rose unbidden in his mind. Creator above, light our steps, draw us home through shadow. Looking at the church steeple catching the day's last light, Elijah prayed those words would prove prophetic. They had walked through shadow indeed, but perhaps now, finally, they were being drawn toward home, and toward justice. Darkness would fall soon. They would need to move carefully, approaching the town after full night when fewer eyes would mark their passage. For now, they retreated into the shelter of the trees to wait for evening's cover, their hearts beating in time with the rhythm of approaching destiny. The church basement smelled of damp stone and old hymnals. Reverend Harlan led them down narrow wooden stairs, his lantern casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. The cellar was small but clean, lined with shelves of preserved foods and church supplies. In one corner, a pot-bellied stove provided warmth against the underground chill. "It ain't much," the Reverend said, setting the lantern on a barrel. "But it's safe. Been hiding folks in need down here since the war." He struck a match and lit a fat white candle, its glow softening the basement's stark shadows. Chloe sank onto a wooden crate, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Her face was pale in the candlelight, but her eyes held steady determination. "Thank you, Reverend. We don't mean to put you at risk." "The Lord's house should always be sanctuary for those seeking justice," Reverend Harlan replied, pulling up another crate to sit. He withdrew a small, leather-bound notebook and pencil from his coat. "Now then, Miss Hollis, tell me everything from the beginning. The truth needs proper witnessing." Elijah stood near the stairs, listening for any movement above while Chloe spoke. Her voice grew stronger as she shared her story, as if each word lifted a weight from her shoulders. "I was helping at the mission school near Fort Gibson," she began, "teaching Cherokee children to read, mostly, and helping tend the sick. Reverend Matthews, the traveling preacher who was killed, he'd visit every few months with donations for the school." She paused, twisting her hands in her lap. "Last month he came to me worried. Said he'd discovered something wrong with the railroad company's accounts. They were supposed to be paying fair prices for Indian land, setting aside money for schools. But the funds were being stolen. Hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for education, just disappearing." Reverend Harlan's pencil scratched across the paper, recording every detail. "Did he have proof?" "Account books, letters between the company men and those false marshals." Chloe's voice caught. "He hid them in my satchel before the attack, said I had to get them to someone who'd help make it right. That's when they shot him, right through the stage window. He died protecting me, protecting the truth." Elijah moved closer, resting a steadying hand on her shoulder. She reached up to grasp his fingers, drawing strength from the contact. "The marriage certificate," she continued softly. "Reverend Matthews had it ready. He knew they were coming for him, wanted to make sure I'd have somewhere safe to go. He'd written to Elijah before, you see, knew him to be an honorable man." "And you're certain these men weren't real marshals?" Reverend Harlan asked. "Real marshals don't shoot preachers in cold blood," Elijah said, firmly. "Or hunt women through snowstorms without proper warrants." The Reverend nodded, making another note. "I've heard rumors about the railroad's dealings. Good men pushed off their land, documents forged, money vanishing. But proof has been hard to come by." "I'll testify to what I saw," Elijah declared. "The ambush at my cabin, their threats, everything. My word still carries weight with the territorial judge. Above them, footsteps creaked across the church floor. They all froze until Reverend Harlan relaxed. Just Brother Thomas lighting the lamps for evening service. You'll be safe here. The cellar entrance is hidden behind the pulpit curtain, and only I have the key. As if to confirm his words, the sound of voices began filtering down, the congregation gathering for Wednesday night worship. Soon, the familiar notes of Amazing Grace drifted through the floorboards. The Reverend rose, tucking away his notebook. I'll bring you some proper food and blankets after service. Try to rest. Tomorrow we'll get these testimonies properly sworn and sent to the Territorial Marshal's office in Denver. When he had gone, Elijah and Chloe sat in companionable silence, listening to the muffled singing above. The hymn ended, and another began. What a friend we have in Jesus, the words barely discernible through the thick floor. Strange, Chloe mused. How much has changed since I first heard that song at my mother's knee? Sometimes I wonder what she'd think of all this. I reckon she'd be proud, Elijah said softly. You're fighting for her people's children, same as she did. Chloe turned to study his face in the candlelight. And what of you? Once this is over, if we succeed in exposing the truth, what then? Been thinking on that. Elijah's voice was thoughtful. My cabin's too small for a proper school, but there's good land nearby. Fine timber for building. Could be a place for learning if someone was willing to teach. You'd do that? Help build a school? Seems right. Way to make amends, maybe. For that Ute boy and all the others who never got their chance. He met her gaze steadily. Course, I'd need help. Someone who knows teaching. Someone with courage to bridge two worlds. Chloe's breath caught. Are you asking me to stay? Even though our marriage certificate was never proper? Proper papers can come later, if you're willing. What matters is what's in our hearts. Elijah moved closer, his calloused hand gentle as he touched her cheek. I know it's soon, with all that's happened. But I reckon when God sends you a miracle, even a bloodied one that arrives by stage, you don't question his timing. Above them, the congregation began singing Blessed Assurance. Chloe's eyes shone with tears and lamplight as she leaned toward him. Their first kiss was soft as a prayer, sweet as spring rain. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. Yes, she whispered. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. The moment held, precious as blown glass, filled with possibilities. Then a gust of wind rattled the church windows, carrying with it the distant thunder of hoofbeats. Chloe tensed, but Elijah kept hold of her hand. We're not alone anymore, he reminded her quietly. Truth's got a way of gathering allies once it starts coming to light. The wind rose outside, heavy with the scent of melting snow and approaching riders. But in the candle-lit cellar, Elijah and Chloe held fast to each other, their hearts beating in time with the hymns above. Two souls finding harbor in love's sanctuary, while destiny approached on the night wind. The morning sun streamed through the church's dusty windows as Reverend Harlan paced the worn floorboards, his weathered face etched with concern. He paused before Elijah and Chloe, who sat in the front pew, their shoulders touching. The territorial law is clear, he said, running a hand through his graying hair. A properly witnessed marriage would give Chloe legal protection as Elijah's wife. Make it harder for them to separate you during questioning. Chloe's fingers twisted in her lap. But we can't risk a public ceremony in town. They'll be watching. No need for that. The Reverend's eyes brightened with purpose. Your cabin, Elijah. It's still standing, though scorched. 2 witnesses and myself. That's all the law requires. I've already spoken to Martha Jenkins and Thomas Burke. They'll stand for you, good Christian folks who understand discretion. Elijah glanced at Chloe. his voice soft. It's your choice. Don't want you feeling pressed into anything. She met his gaze steadily. I chose you when I stayed at your cabin that first night. Everything since has only made me more certain. The ride to Elijah's cabin took most of the morning. They traveled in pairs, taking different trails to avoid attention. The winter wind had gentled, carrying hints of approaching spring. By early afternoon, they gathered in what remained of the main room. Half the roof was gone, burned away in the marshal's raid, but the stone fireplace still stood proud against the mountain sky. Martha Jenkins, the miller's widow, helped Chloe smooth her borrowed dress, a simple blue cotton that matched her eyes. Thomas Burke, who'd lost an arm at Shiloh but still worked his forge, stood beside Elijah. Patches of melting snow dotted the scorched floorboards where they gathered. Reverend Harlan opened his Bible, its pages fluttering in the mountain breeze. Sunlight slanted through the broken roof, casting a golden glow over the small group. The ceremony was brief but profound, their words carrying across the silent peaks. I, Elijah James Carver, take thee, Chloe May Hollis. His voice was rough with emotion but unwavering. I, Chloe May Hollis, take thee, Elijah James Carver. Her Cherokee accent softened the words into music. When they exchanged rings, simple bands Thomas had crafted from old silver dollars, tears gleamed in Martha's eyes. The Reverend's prayer seemed to fill the broken cabin with grace, transforming the burned timbers into cathedral walls. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder, Reverend Harlan proclaimed. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Their first kiss as a married couple was gentle, almost shy, but filled with promise. Thomas and Martha embraced them both, then departed separately as planned, leaving the newlyweds with Reverend Harlan. Elijah built a small fire in the old hearth, while Chloe set out coffee, and the bread Martha had brought. The flames cast dancing shadows on the remaining walls as evening approached. They sat close together, sharing the simple meal and discussing their next steps. I've sent word to Judge Harrison in Denver, the Reverend said, warming his hands around his coffee cup. He's honest, known for standing up to the railroad companies. Once he receives our sworn statements, we'll surrender ourselves, Elijah finished. Go through proper channels. Let the truth come out legal and clean. Chloe nodded. The evidence in my satchel, combined with our testimony. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the peaceful moment. Splinters exploded from the doorframe as everyone dove for cover. Elijah pulled Chloe behind the stone hearth, while Reverend Harlan pressed himself against the remaining wall. Come out, Carver, Marshal Pike's voice boomed across the gathering dusk. We've got you surrounded. No more running. More shots peppered the cabin. Through gaps in the walls, they could see riders moving through the trees, torches flickering like angry fireflies in the deepening shadows. Reverend, Elijah whispered urgently, there's a root cellar, back corner. Get Chloe there. No, Chloe gripped his arm. I won't leave you. Please. His eyes met hers, fierce with love and determination. I just made sacred vows to protect you. Let me keep them. Another volley of shots filled the air. A stray bullet knocked Reverend Harlan's hat from his head, making him flinch. Both of you, Elijah insisted. Go. I'll keep them busy. Draw them away from the cellar. Whatever happens, the truth has to survive. Chloe's hand found his cheek, and they shared one desperate kiss. Then she let the Reverend guide her towards the back of the cabin, staying low beneath the gunfire. Elijah watched until they disappeared through the hidden trapdoor before rising to his full height, rifle ready. All right, Pike, he shouted into the gathering darkness. Let's talk about truth. The shooting paused. In the sudden silence, Elijah could hear his own heart pounding, steady as a drum. His wedding ring caught the last gleam of sunset, a circle of promise worth any price to keep. "Burn them out!" Marshal Pike's voice cut through the darkness. The sound of breaking glass followed, then the whoosh of burning oil as lanterns shattered against the cabin walls. Flames licked up the dried timber faster than summer lightning. Orange light flooded the cabin interior, casting wild shadows through the smoke. Elijah crouched behind the stone hearth, his rifle barrel hot from returning fire. "Give us the woman, Carver," another marshal shouted. "We know she's in there." Elijah's shoulder exploded in white-hot pain as a bullet found its mark through a gap in the wall. He stumbled, catching himself against the hearth. Blood darkened his shirt sleeve, spreading quickly. The wound burned worse than the flames now consuming his home. Smoke poured through the broken roof, thick and choking. It filled the rafters, then descended like a heavy blanket. Elijah dropped to his knees, coughing violently, his vision blurred. Through the haze he saw movement, Chloe emerging from the root cellar, a wet cloth pressed to her face. "No," he tried to shout, but smoke stole his voice. She shouldn't risk herself for him. Chloe reached him as another volley of bullets splintered the doorframe. She wrapped her arms around his chest, surprisingly strong for her small frame. "Lean on me," she commanded, her voice muffled through the cloth. Together they stumbled toward the back wall, where fire hadn't yet reached. Elijah's wounded shoulder screamed with each movement. He could barely see through the smoke and tears. Chloe guided him, sure-footed despite the chaos. They found the loose boards Elijah had never gotten around to fixing, now a blessing rather than a task undone. Chloe kicked them free. Cold night air rushed in, sweet as spring water after the choking smoke. "Almost there," Chloe encouraged, helping Elijah through the gap. Snow soaked their clothes as they crawled into the darkness. Behind them, flames roared higher, painting the night sky amber and red. The marshals' shouts became muffled as they pushed through deep snow toward the tree line. Elijah's strength ebbed with each step. Blood left a dark trail on the white ground, but the snow might help hide their path in the darkness. A tremendous crash echoed through the valley, the cabin's roof collapsing. Sparks shot skyward like a fountain of fireflies. The heat reached them even at the forest's edge, a final blast of warmth before the winter night swallowed them. Elijah stumbled, his legs giving way, everything tilted sideways. Only Chloe's grip kept him from falling face first into the snow. She helped him sit against a broad pine trunk, sheltered from view by its low branches. "Stay with me," she pleaded, pressing her shawl against his wounded shoulder. Her hands shook, but her voice remained steady. "Lord Jesus, guide our steps. Protect your servants in our hour of need. Show us the path to safety and justice." Elijah's head swam. The flames consuming his cabin blurred into strange patterns. Years of memories burned away. His first wife's rocking chair, the Bible his father had given him, the simple table where he and Chloe had shared their first meal. Yet somehow, watching it all burn felt right, like a cleansing fire, stripping away the old to make room for something new. Chloe's prayer continued, her words mixing with the crackle of flames and distant shouts of frustrated men. Her hand found his, squeezing tight. The simple silver band on his finger pressed against her palm, their new beginning, forged in fire and faith. "The stream," he whispered, fighting to stay conscious. "Follow it. South. Throws off. Tracking dogs." "Hush now." Chloe touched his face gently. "Save your strength. I know these mountains too, the Cherokee ways. We'll find shelter." The pain in his shoulder pulsed with each heartbeat. Dark spots danced at the edges of his vision. The last thing Elijah saw before consciousness slipped away was Chloe's face, determined and beautiful in the fading firelight, her lips still moving in prayer as she held his hand and watched their old life burn away into ash and memory. The cabin's destruction blazed against the night sky, not an ending, but a crucible. In its flames, everything they had been was transformed into something stronger. Like silver refined by fire, their bond would emerge purer for the burning. Moonlight pierced through breaking clouds, casting silver paths across the snow. Chloe stumbled forward, her hands raw and bleeding from the splintered wood that had scraped her during their escape. Her feet had lost all feeling, and her wet skirts hung heavy with ice. But she pressed on, half dragging, half carrying Elijah's unconscious form. The wind shifted, bringing wood smoke and the faint sound of drums. Through the trees, she glimpsed the warm glow of campfires. A Ute settlement nestled in the sheltered valley below. Hope flickered in her chest, like those distant flames. As she approached the camp's edge, warriors emerged from the shadows, spears ready. Chloe raised one hand in peace, supporting Elijah with the other. "Please," she called out, her voice hoarse from smoke. "My husband needs help. He knows your people, Elijah Carver." The name rippled through the gathering crowd. An elder stepped forward, his face weathered like ancient bark. Chief Tava studied them both, his eyes lingering on Elijah's pale face. "The trapper who once brought us furs," he said in careful English, "before the shadow fell between our peoples." "Yes," Chloe whispered. "Please help him." The chief gestured to his men. They lifted Elijah gently, carrying him to a warm lodge where a healer waited. The old woman worked swiftly, cleaning his wound with herb-steeped water and applying poultices that filled the air with sharp, healing scents. Through the long night, Chloe knelt beside Elijah while the healer sang soft prayers. Chief Tava sat with them, speaking quietly of how Elijah had once been a friend to the Ute, before grief and guilt drove him into solitude. "The past cannot be undone," the chief said, "but the circle can be made whole again." As dawn's first light touched the lodge poles, Elijah's breathing grew stronger. Color returned to his face. The healer nodded in satisfaction, laying a gentle hand on Chloe's shoulder. Chief Tava rose, touching his heart in a gesture of peace. "What was broken begins to heal," he said. "In helping him, we help ourselves remember the way of compassion." Tears of gratitude filled Chloe's eyes as she watched Elijah's chest rise and fall in steady rhythm. In this simple lodge, among people who had every reason to turn them away, she witnessed the power of mercy to transform ancient hurts into new hope. Spring's first warmth crept through the courthouse windows, casting golden light across the packed wooden benches. The territorial courthouse in Timber Hollow buzzed with whispers as Judge Bannister adjusted his spectacles, studying the documents spread before him. Elijah sat in the front row, his left arm bound in a neat sling. Chloe's small hand rested in his right one, her fingers trembling slightly. Behind them, townsfolk filled every available space, their winter coats giving way to lighter shawls and jackets as the seasonal thaw began its work outside. Reverend Harlan approached the witness stand first, his Bible tucked under one arm. He spoke clearly about finding Chloe and Elijah that fateful night, about hearing their testimony and performing their wedding ceremony. When he described the attack on the cabin, several women in the crowd gasped. "And you vouch for their character, Reverend?" Judge Bannister asked, peering over his glasses. "With all my heart and soul," the preacher replied. "I've known Elijah Carver for years as an honest, God-fearing man, and Miss Chloe, Mrs. Carver now, has shown nothing but courage and truth in the face of terrible danger." Chief Tava rose next, his dignified presence commanding immediate silence. He wore traditional dress but spoke in clear English, describing how his people had sheltered and healed Elijah. The chief's testimony carried special weight. Here was a man whose grandson had died by Elijah's accidental shot years ago, yet who chose mercy over vengeance. "The circle of harm must be broken," Chief Tava said, his voice strong and sure. "These two have shown us the way of peace." Throughout the morning, more witnesses came forward. The stagecoach driver, recovered from his wounds, described the original ambush. A telegraph operator testified about suspicious messages between Marshal Pike and railroad officials. But the most damning evidence lay in the preacher's leather satchel, recovered from the stage wreck. Judge Bannister held up document after document, letters proving the railroad's scheme to steal native school funds, forged requisition orders, and a ledger showing years of systematic theft. Marshal Pike and his men stood in chains, their badges tarnished by truth. "The evidence is overwhelming," the judge declared, his voice filling the hushed courtroom. "Marshal Warren Pike and his deputies are hereby found guilty of murder, theft of federal funds, and corruption under color of law." He paused, fixing the false marshals with a stern gaze. "The sentence is death by hanging." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Pike's face turned ashen, but he maintained his rigid pose. "As for Mrs. Chloe May Carver," the judge continued, "all charges are dismissed. Her name is cleared of any wrongdoing." He smiled kindly at Chloe. "The court commends your bravery in bringing this corruption to light." Chloe pressed her face into Elijah's good shoulder, tears of relief flowing freely. Around them, the townsfolk began to applaud. The judge raised his hand for silence. "Mr. Carver, the court wishes to award you a portion of the recovered funds as a reward for your service to justice. What say you?" Elijah stood slowly, his voice quiet but firm. "Your Honor, I thank you, but I cannot accept reward money for doing what's right." He glanced at Chloe, who nodded encouragement. "Instead, I'd ask that the preacher's recovered gold be used as he intended, to build a frontier school for orphans and half-native children. Let some good come from all this sorrow." The applause started again, stronger this time. People rose to their feet, hat brims wiped at tears, and even Judge Bannister dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. Chief Tava touched his heart in approval, and Reverend Harlan lifted his hands in blessing. "So ordered," the judge declared, bringing down his gavel. "The school shall be built as a testament to truth, justice, and the power of mercy to heal our wounds." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Chloe embraced Elijah carefully, mindful of his healing shoulder. Around them, townsfolk pressed close to shake hands and offer congratulations. Through the windows, spring sunshine poured down like heaven's own approval on a morning when justice and faith had triumphed over darkness. The rebuilt cabin stood proud against the Colorado sky, its fresh-hewn logs and gleaming windows a testament to renewal. Where smoke and fury had once raged, now summer wildflowers dotted the clearing, their faces turned toward the warm July sun. The structure had risen larger than before, with wide doors to welcome all who sought learning within its walls. Inside, afternoon light streamed through tall windows, dancing across the neat rows of simple benches where 12 children sat attentive. Their small slates clicked softly as they practiced their letters. Elijah moved between the rows, his healed shoulder allowing him to point and guide with gentle patience. He paused beside Running Deer, a young Ute boy whose tongue stuck out in concentration as he formed each careful mark. "That's fine work," Elijah murmured, remembering another Ute child from years past. But now, instead of grief, the memory brought peace, a reminder of how far grace could reach. At the front of the room, Chloe stood before a large slate board, chalk dust powdering her apron as she wrote out the day's scripture verse. Her voice lifted in a Cherokee hymn she'd learned from her, Mother, the melody weaving through the summer air like a blessing. Some of the children hummed along, their mixed voices creating a harmony that seemed to make the very walls glow with joy. Sarah Thompson, a settler's daughter, shared her slate pencil with little Hawk, their heads bent together over sums. Near them, William Running Bear helped Thomas Miller sound out difficult words, their friendship as natural as breathing. The sight made Chloe's heart swell. This was what the murdered preacher had dreamed of, what his stolen gold had finally helped build, a place where hatred melted away before children's laughter. As the afternoon waned, thunder rumbled in the distance, a summer storm approaching from the mountains. The children gathered their books and slates, filing out with cheerful goodbyes. Chloe stood in the doorway, watching them scatter like quail across the flowering meadow, some heading for the settlement, others toward the Ute camp in the valley. Elijah came up behind her, sliding his arm around her waist. The touch was familiar now, comfortable as an old hymn. They stood together, watching the sunset paint the clouds in shades of gold and rose. More thunder rolled across the peaks, but neither flinched. Those sounds held no terror now, only the promise of sweet rain and growing things. Teacher? Young Bobby Miller had lingered behind, his slate clutched to his chest. Pa wants to know, how did you and Mrs. Carver meet? He says there's quite a tale to it. Elijah's eyes met Chloe's, sharing a private smile. The memories flashed between them. Blood on snow, desperate flights, fiery destruction, and through it all, God's steady hand leading them home. He drew her closer, feeling her warmth against his side. Well, son, he said, voice gentle with amusement, I bought a bride for $5. He paused as Bobby's eyes went wide. But God had other plans. He sent me a bloodied angel instead. Chloe laughed softly, the sound mixing with distant thunder. The Lord works in mysterious ways, she added, touching the simple gold band on her finger. Bobby nodded sagely, though his young mind couldn't grasp all the layers of their story. He scampered off toward home as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Inside their schoolhouse home, Elijah lit the lamp while Chloe straightened the benches. The familiar glow filled the room, catching the gilt edges of the Bible on her desk, and the children's artwork tacked to the walls. Thunder rolled again, closer now, but gentle, like God's own voice reminding them of promises kept. They stood together in the doorway, watching the rain bless their little valley. Where fear had once ruled, peace now reigned. Where hatred had burned, love now bloomed. The lamplight spilled out into the gathering dusk, a beacon of hope for all who passed, native and settler alike. Their new beginning had taken root and flourished, nourished by faith, watered by grace. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.